Did you just throw your phone?
No, I did not throw the phone. Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in for another episode of Beg Pardon, podcast that dares you to say it again. As always, I'm your host Anthony, joined by Carlos. And today we have another Hall of History episode for you guys. So before we begin, I'd like to play out a little scenario, if you will indulge me. So everyone close their eyes, myself included. Carlos, close your eyes.
I was like, okay.
Close your eyes. Now, in this scenario, we're going to go back to 2016. Donald Trump just became president of the United States, and because Hillary Clinton received the second most amount of votes, she became vice president. And now these two individuals have to inhabit the White House together and try and navigate this system of politics at each other's side. Now open your eyes, and I'm pretty sure we're all in hell. That's exactly what would have happened if Hillary Clinton would have became vice president to Donald Trump. Why? Because I for one could never see them getting along in any way, shape, or form. But believe it or not, at the birth of what is now modern day United States, that was what happened. That could very well have been a possibility if things didn't change. Historically, the person with the second most amount of votes would become vice president by default. So Carlos, what do you think that would look like? What do you think a Clinton-Trump White House would look like? Or, excuse me, a Trump-Clinton White House would look like?
I think it would look like the worst sitcom that's ever been written.
Yeah.
It would be The Odd Couple times like 50, because I don't think anything would get done, ever. I don't think anything would get done. I think, it would just split decisions down the middle even more, because you're going to have Republicans who want one thing, you're going to have Democrats who want one thing, and now you have two people, both VP and the president, who are saying conflicting things. Like, one's going to be saying wear a mask, and one's going to be calling it a hoax. Who's going to believe who? Spoiler alert, I know who they're going to believe. So
Right. And I think that, so kind of how all this came about anyways, and you brought up a good point, you had two people from two different political parties, and back in the day, at least early on, they didn't have that issue. It wasn't until 1804 that they ratified the 12th Amendment, which would call for a vice president in the first place. So then back in 1796, you had John Adams as president and Thomas Jefferson as vice president, and they were of two different political parties. And they were like, wow, this is awkward. It's awkward if this is what's going to happen. It's awkward if this is what's going to happen. And then you fast forward to 1800, and then you had a tie. So you're like, now what do we do? Because they've received the same amount of votes. So then the following cycle, 1804, comes around, and then they ratify the 12th Amendment. They're like, hey, now the vice president will be elected into office. And I honestly couldn't imagine having, I don't know, one could argue that it would be better for the political system if you had the two, I guess, largest heads of state. That's arguable, and we'll get into that later. But you have the two largest heads of state in your respective countries of opposing political parties. One could argue that you could get more done that way.
I think it would.
Go ahead.
I was gonna say I think it'd be better if they lean closer to the middle.
Yes.
That would work better. But if you have both who are on way opposite ends of the spectrum, I think it would be a nightmare.
Yeah. And I think part of that is because the role of the vice president is so vague. So, I mean, constitutionally, they only have two jobs. One, that's to be the deciding vote in the Senate to break any ties. Two, to receive the electoral votes during the presidential elections that they are in office for. They receive the electoral votes, and then they announce who the winner is. So anybody that works at a bingo hall could do that. and presumably taking the office of the president if God forbid the president dies. I mean, that's the thing. You're one heartbeat away from the highest office in the land. And I think that's where it comes in. We're like, wow, this is such a monumental position. But other than that, constitutionally, it's really not that great. I mean,
You're a glorified hype man.
Yeah. I think that, and I didn't plan on doing this on the show today, but I think it might be cool if we just take a look, at least at the last two. You had Joe Biden, who I thought, like, if in terms of like hype men, I thought was like a great hype man for Obama.
Oh, yeah.
I mean,
they were
were
the Flavor Flav of hype men.
Right. They were cool as cucumbers together. I mean, that's like the Biden Obama bromance. I mean,
Yeah.
that's been talked about for years. I even think like news outlets did like montages of all of their broiest moments together in the White House whenever they were leaving. I think that partnership was super solid. And then in a similar tone, you don't have that camaraderie with Mike Pence and Donald Trump, but no matter how one could perceive what Donald Trump says or does as ridiculous, Mike Pence, I mean, if you ask him, he's going to fall on that sword. He's loyal.
Yeah,
he's extremely
lose or
loyal.
draw.
Yeah, he's extremely loyal. And I think more than anything, that's kind of the role of the office, is to hype up your president and to, I guess, be a bouncing board of ideas if they have any questions or they're concerned or making decisions. I don't know. I would like to think that would be the role. Maybe I'm even making it bigger than what it is. Maybe they're not even. No one even cares. But at least to me, that seems like what the role would kind of be like. So when you think about this now, I mean, I don't think Trump would go to Hillary for any type of. I mean, during the campaign, he said he was going to have her imprisoned whenever he became president of the United States.
Yeah,
so
she's still free though.
Yeah. So I mean, I don't know how that would have. I don't know how that would have worked out.
I mean, but even like prior to 1967, there were times where there was no vice president. So they cared so little about it where they were just like, we can go with that. We don't really, it's not that deep.
Yeah.
So
it was a total of 37 years prior to, and Carlos brought up 1967, the 25th Amendment basically required a president and vice president to be elected. But prior to that, there was a combined total of 37 years where there was no vice president at all. Because constitutionally, the office, there isn't that much requirement to even have the office.
Yeah. 1967 was the year where they were like, take your little brother with you if you're going to go. You have to have a vice, if you're going to go, have to have a vice president. Take him with you. And that was when like everyone was like, this is a real role now. I'm going to campaign for this.
Right. and that kind of so that also set, so a president can only be president of the United States for 2 terms of 4 years or a total of 10 years if they assume the office while they are vice president. And most people don't know there are no term limits on vice president of the United States. None. Somebody could be vice president forever. There is not a term limit on the vice presidency of the United States at all. It's like the Senate. There's no term limits in the Senate.
I didn't know the vice president could keep going. Like, people just have him such as an afterthought. They're like, is he still here? Like,
yeah, they literally could do that if they wanted to. There's like absolutely no term limits on the office, which is very, which goes to show you the amount of political influence that position historically has had.
Yeah.
Which amounts to, again, working at a bingo hall.
I was gonna say, I mean, if you look at it, John Adams has the highest number of like breaking the tie at 29. Joe Biden was in the job for 8 years. Goose egg amount of ties he broke. So in terms of constitutionally, didn't do a job. Didn't do one job. If you want to look at it constitutionally. So, ugh.
And then you have to be prepared. You have to be prepared too. So that's another thing that I think is important whenever somebody does call on their to whoever to run as vice president. In the event that something does happen, especially whenever you have people running for president that are older. I mean, I remember back in 2008, whenever John McCain was running, and whenever he tapped Sarah Palin, it was very shocking because it wasn't anticipated. And I think in the Republican Party, and again, I could be wrong, but this is just my opinion. I think in the Republican Party, she was respected. Outside of the Republican Party, I don't think so as much. And then as soon as she got into the limelight and unfortunately succumbed to like a series of gaffes, I think it cost him the entire campaign. I can't go back and think about the 2008 election without thinking about her. And that's not in a good way.
Yeah, but it's also bizarre because when you think about it, her like moments weren't even nearly as bad as the moments that have happened recently. And people tore her apart. But recently, people were like, this is the smartest move. He is quick like a fox, that one.
I mean, and this gets into another show, but I think that goes into the perception of men and women in political power.
Absolutely.
And
absolutely.
There are women who I respect and love in my family who have said women have no business like being president of the United States. Yeah. That they just don't. They just old school, I guess. They're just not.
I guess.
Yeah, they just don't believe it, and it's sad, but that's the stigma that still is in a lot of places throughout this country. But you have to be prepared, and the public has to have faith that you're able to execute that job if and when the time comes. So the quickest, John Tyler was William Henry Harrison's vice president, and William Henry Harrison died less than 30 days after assuming office, and John Tyler was like, oh, I'm gonna have to take up the mantle. In less than 30, I mean, could you imagine having to take that job that you're not even thinking? People joke around about Trump all the time whenever they were like, I don't even think he thought that this was a thing. And then he won, and he was like, oh, God. Like, we won. What are we going to do? But imagine that. Imagine being like, oh, wow, we're going to start this partnership together, we're going to start this job together, and then dead.
Yeah.
That would be insane. You wouldn't even know what to do. I wouldn't even know what to do. I'd be like, so I'm not ready to be president, but I think I just signed some. Do I sign that? Like, that's literally what I would be like. Like that. Like, I don't know what to do with my hands. Like, I would be just like him in that movie where I'm just like, I don't know how to handle that. But I guess one could argue that I mean, if you're really attempting to be vice president, you're just a heartbeat away. So you have to.
I was gonna say, I mean, when you think about it, you went into a job where you were like, I don't really need any qualifications. I only need to know two things, right? And then that's like the ultimate pop quiz where they're like, dude, you got to learn this all now. And you're kind of just like, oh my God, what chapter?
Yeah. You're like, Like, I may have been popular enough with people to get elected, but I don't know what to do once I'm in the office. And then speaking of popularity, something that I found super interesting is that Gerald Ford is the only person who served in the role of vice president and president and was elected to neither office. Neither. So you had, I think his first name, but you had Spiro Agnew as vice president under Richard Nixon, I believe, who resigned from office because I think of money laundering or like bribing or whatever.
Yeah, it was tax evasion and taking bribes, which rocked that presidency because that was no scandal rocked that presidency harder than that one. Let's just.
So then Ford's appointed as vice president of the United States, and then everyone knows what happens next. Richard Nixon's no longer president, resigns the presidency, vacates the office, which prompted Ford to then become president of the United States, not elected into either office, and it's just like, hey guys, I'm here. Like, what do you do with that? That's even worse than getting vice president and not knowing what to do whenever you have to become president. That's the ultimate.
Yeah.
Not only do I not know what to do, I wasn't prepared to run for office. I didn't even run for office. No one even voted for me. How am I here? How old am I? Where am I at? What did I have for breakfast? Like, it's like everything becomes like this huge warp where you're like, oh, that's me now. Like, I'm in charge now.
Yeah. That's almost the equivalent of you somehow stumbled onto the red carpet of the Oscars, made it in, and then you won best director or something, and you weren't nominated. You weren't even invited to the Oscars, but somehow you made it to that stage, and you're now holding a statue, and you're like, I didn't prepare a speech.
Right.
One small step for man. Like, you just start putting speeches all together.
Thank you. Bye. Like, that's literally what it would be. It would be so uncomfortable. But yeah, I mean, why I feel this is relevant and this is interesting now is we're obviously in an election year, right? And we're going to, and again, I could be wrong. Because if there's one thing that I do know about the Trump presidency is it is anything but conventional. Could Trump give the old to Pence? Maybe. It would be shocking. I don't see it happening. But I'm not going to count it out because this dude does nothing by the book. Ever.
He doesn't know the book.
Right, yeah. He's like, you have to read these things? It's literally...
pictures.
Right, yeah. No pictures. What is it, size 10 font? This is Helvetica? I don't know what the hell this is. But you have, somebody who's completely changed the rule book, and he could knock Pence out and choose another VP. But we have Biden, who is the Democratic nominee for president of the United States. Is choosing the vice president, in your opinion, given historically, again, the role of the office, there's not... now, that doesn't mean that presidents can't assign duties to the vice president. I think every vice president that has held that office has served in a different capacity and been in charge of different things and spearheaded different things. But historically, knowing that it's a little bit lackluster, how important do you think Joe Biden's selection of vice president is as it pertains to this election this year?
I think, if you look at it, like you said, historically, my gut is to say not that important. But with the way everything's changed, like you said, and like the book has been basically rewritten in terms of what the vice president role even looks like. I mean, we haven't heard anything official of like this is what they're in charge of, but like you said, sometimes they'll spearhead a foreign policy thing, or I think Pence was even like head of the CDC thing when Corona first started. Pence was like, I'm going to spearhead this. And he did phenomenal, by the way. I'm really glad he did that. But when you look like historically at like John Gardner, who was FDR's, who literally said the role isn't not worth a bucket of piss. So, it's hard to say like the VP is going to matter. But I think when you have two candidates like this year who people are really conflicted by on a personal level, I think that VP is going to matter so much more because people have kind of a comfort of knowing like, okay, at least he's going to conversate with this person. Like, at least this person's going to be able to share their input and they're going to speak on my behalf. The president might not feel how I feel, but at least the vice president will be like, hey, I took the temperature outside. You might want to change your tune a bit. I think that's why it's more important right now.
Do you see, if there's another 4 years of a Trump presidency, do you see Pence doing that job?
I don't.
Not doing the job as in terms of like being the vice president of the United States, but being that thermometer
No.
for Donald Trump.
No, I see. If we do 4 more years, I see the title being changed to like emperor or something, and Pence has to be like, "That's a lovely scarf you have on today, sir," like he does now. It's just gonna be worse because he's like, "We won twice." So I think that there's no taking that ego down. Even if Pence were to be like, "Hey, the people are really upset," I think that ego it's too far gone for anybody to really do anything with.
Is it wrong to have an ego if you're a president of the United States?
To have an ego, no. To have a narcissistic ego, 100%. If you had a patriotic ego where you were like, I'm going to right the wrongs and I'm going to, really try to make us top dog in people's eyes again, rather than literally countries laughing and tweeting about us, yeah, it's good to have an ego. But if it's a narcissistic ego, I think I think that's the worst job you can have for that. There's no other job that you can have an ego like that. We were like, that's pretty bad.
Right. So, switching gears into Joe Biden, how important do you personally feel it is that he nominate a woman to be his vice president in this day and age, or do you feel like it's not really that important right now?
I feel like it's extremely important, to be honest. Especially because, I think we had that chance with Hillary, and we all thought it was going to happen, and it didn't. And I think, now is the best time to do that, because clearly the cream of the crop has not been picked here. So, in my eyes. So I think it's really important to have like Elizabeth Warren, or is it Kamala Harris? How do you say her first name? Kamala Harris.
I think.
That she would be another. At least we tried. She would be another great pick. As much as I would like to see him pick like a Bernie Sanders, I think both of those women have the same type of mentality of Bernie. They're just not as rigid. Like Bernie won't budge. He's not going to compromise.
Yeah.
So.
And I don't know necessarily that the world is ready. The United States is ready for a Sanders presidency. Well, clearly they're not, or they would have voted, or he would have made it farther in the primary process.
Yeah. We realize they're not.
Yeah. So clearly it wasn't the right time. You mentioned Hillary, and you mentioned that we almost had that chance with Hillary Clinton. Do you feel if Tim Kaine would have had a larger national profile, or might have been somebody else, that would have changed the game, or no? How big of a role do you think the VP played into the 2016 election?
I don't think the VP played that big of a role into it, to be honest.
Me either.
I really don't. I don't think if you polled most Americans, I don't think they could even told you who Hillary picked for VP. Spoiler alert, I couldn't tell you who Hillary picked. So, if I'm most American...
I think that in 2016, you had in different ways, two very polarizing people.
Yeah.
Two different polarizing people that, good or bad, rub people very much the right way and very much the wrong way in their own parties. So then you just had, it wasn't a landslide election in the slightest. So, that's what it just boiled down to. Is that you just had two very polarizing people, and you had one person, in my opinion, in Hillary, who was either just a bit more arrogant or had a bit more confidence, or, sad to say this, had more faith in people, but I don't feel like did the work necessary to get the votes. I think that what everyone relied on was, well, Obama carried this 8 years in a row, and Obama did this and Obama did that. Hillary's not Obama. Biden's not Obama. Something that's happening this year as well. Biden's not Obama. So I think that you have a different set of challenges, and that's why this year in particular, it's going to be very important, the role on the campaign trail, in office and the selection process of the vice president of the United States. Biden's already committed to nominating a woman. Does that mean we'll see Pence leave office or in drag? Who knows? I don't know. But one of those two things may even happen. You know, Trump's somebody that sees something and he's like, you know what? If you do it, I need to do it 10 times bigger and 10 times better.
Fair.
He is. He's not somebody that takes. He's not somebody that is going to take somebody out. I don't know the word to say it, but it was a very calculated decision by Joe Biden to nominate a woman. Is what I'm saying. It's very calculated. Chances are it's going to be a woman of color, which is also extremely calculated. So I can't help but to think Trump is going to have some calculations up his sleeve for the race. Now, whether that's defacing Biden or calling him an animal or whatever it is, I don't know, or making changes to the vice president, that's to be seen. But I think this year more than ever, vice president, who they pick, what they say, what they do, it's going to be extremely important. So while everyone's there thinking about who you're going to be voting for president, make sure you keep that in the back of your mind too. You also have two guys that are going to be president of the United States who aren't spring chickens. I mean, God forbid something happened, but they're not in the youngest gentleman.
Yeah,
so
no JFK's there.
Right. So you have to think, could this person be president of the United States, or do I see this person being president of the United States? And it's going to play a bigger role than I think most people think it will. And just be grateful that we don't live in the day where we'd be living through a Trump-Clinton presidency. Because, at least for me personally, if there is one thing worse than a Trump presidency, it would be a shared White House between them, because it would be a complete and total massacre, I think.
Yeah.
It would be absolutely atrocious. So, guys, let us know what you think. Do you feel the role of vice president is even worth discussing or worth talking about? Do you take it into consideration whenever you're voting for president of the United States? And we'd just love to hear your comments on what you think the future is going to look like in that role, and how important that role is going to be in this election, this year, and in this cycle. So make sure you guys follow us on all social media. All the links will be below this video. And as always, thank you so much for tuning in each and every week to our episodes.
And that will do it for us on this week's Hall of History. As always, he's been Anthony, I've been Carlos, and remember, now you know, and knowing is half the battle, just like G.I. Joe said. Till next time.